So the secret is to keep the mic behind the speaker, so it doesn't make really unpleasant noises. You don't even need this, but I'm gonna put that. Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We have some new folks here, and we have some returnees, and we're grateful for both. So thank you very much for being here. This is a Know Now dialogue, part of our ongoing America 250 series. And we are surrounded by, in case you were wondering, cartoons. I think that's fairly apparent. These are two Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonists, Nick Anderson and Mike Lukovich, and they definitely have a point of view. So it's worth taking your time to move through some of these images because there's something very gratifying about looking at them. Okay, so we are really lucky here tonight because Jim and Deb Fallows are really wise people. And let me just break it down. For those of journalists in the room, and we have some, Jim is iconic in our profession. There is no finer reporter and chronicler of Americana, and then I've learned, but boy, your Asia reporting and analysis has been unparalleled. So that was really really exciting. But most exciting is how you write and why you write, and it's clear you're about getting out the story, and the story as clearly and as concisely, but also as vividly as possible, and of course facts. And then in between us is Deb, who's a linguist and a very accomplished writer, who's also been, did I mention the Atlantic? That was Jim's stomping ground for many, many years, and Deb has written for the Atlantic among many other publications, and is a very distinguished linguist. Do you also speak languages, by the way?
I can't tell you how many countries we've been to where people will listen to Deb speaking Swedish or Japanese or Mandarin or French.
Okay.
You know.
Wowza. Okay, so she not only studies languages, but is a language speaker. You study the etymology of language, no? And
or a language listener. The dark secret of linguistics is that you end up knowing a lot about language with a capital L, and it doesn't really stress anything practical like being able to speak the language, but it is useful to know what you can do.
and the most difficult languages to learn. Yeah, that's incredible. Wow, your range is amazing. So, this husband and wife team went on the road in 2013, and I should say into the sky, because they cruised the country, stopping through towns across this nation, examining all kinds of elements that we know very little about, or elements that we know all about. And I think they're going to share some really cool perspective. And I just want to kick it off, if I may, with a question, then you just let it rip, which is let's just start with linguistics. You made your way around towns that are populated by people from places we've never heard of. And you were listening to sounds and vibrations and all kinds of elements that you're connecting to, but that you somehow translated for us on these pages so beautifully. This is their book, by the way. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, Amy, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for those incredible introductions. I just call him, Jim, can you take out the garbage now? Does have that skill too. Actually, before we start, I think maybe we should set a little context for this book and this story.
Please do.
And I'm gonna pass this to Jim, just because.
So the main context is that Deb and I have been together for a long time. We met on a blind date in college when we were both 18. We've been together, got married when we were 21, and we've been together through all the adventures since then. And we've done things together. When our kids were our kids were born in DC. When they were elementary school age, we moved to Asia to Japan and Malaysia for 4 years. And just, we've done things like that with our kids and together. And so in 2006, we moved to China and spent a number of years there. And when we were in China, we lived both in Beijing and Shanghai for a couple of years each. We spent as much time as we could on the road to little towns of 1 million or 2 to try to see what was going on there. We came back to the US around 2013. We thought, let's do the same thing in the US. Let's see what you're not hearing about from the main media. And by chance, I've been a long-time small airplane pilot, and we had a little Cirrus airplane. Any aviators here? So Cirruses are famous because they're the small plane with a parachute for the entire plane. And we got one of the first ones that came on the market in 2000. And what we've learned is there's lots of places, there are 5,000 little airports in the US. And so over the years, we've been to lots of these places you wouldn't otherwise go, flyover places literally. And so we started in 2013 to see what it is like we started with Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is actually quite a large place, but then going smaller and smaller and smaller to towns of 100 or 200. And our first impression was, you won't believe how much is going on in name your town, Scranton, PA, or Duluth, Minnesota, or whatever. Then we started seeing patterns, and we continued this. We thought this would be a couple-month project, and ended up being several years. We made a movie with HBO because we thought that the America that Tocqueville had discovered was still there, and that people still felt better about where they were. They felt better about the America they lived in and knew firsthand than the America they read about or saw on the news. So we're trying to connect these stories. Is that the kind of setup you were wanting for me to do? More
No, that's good. So that's the context. So back to the language. So my beat was more language, and Jim could tell the parallel story of beer, which is why we're drinking this, which I'm sure he will later on. But the language story was useful to me for a whole bunch of reasons. Language is kind of what I carry in my backpack through life, and it's what got me through China, of just, it's everything about China is so alien to us that most people who go there need a way in through something, whatever their passion is, whether it's textiles or art or flowers or yoga, you name your thing. Mine was language. So I struggled with the language. So when we got back and started this long journey around the country, it was natural for me to just listen to how people said things and what they were saying. And one of my early favorite discoveries in language was what we started to call the second question. The first question, like in a group like this, if you don't know people, you say hello, and ask your name and so forth. Then in towns, there's usually a second question that is probing, but in a really subtle and non-judgmental way. For example, in DC, people say, well, where do you work? Or who do you work for? And it's a way of kind of getting your bearings with whoever that person is. And we're all used to that. In Chicago, the question is, what's your parish? Even if you're not Catholic, you can tell, everybody knows which Catholic parish they're in. And when you say it, that's a way of kind of setting the stage for getting to know who the people are. So, anybody here from St. Louis?
And what's the question there?
What high school did you go to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It
Lots of
never
other cities.
fails, yeah. Exactly. What high school did you go to? Absolutely. Same thing in Cincinnati and Kansas City and a few others, but I have yet to meet someone from St. Louis who doesn't know that question. In LA, it is, how'd you get here? Well, I took the 405 to the 10, and on and on. And then second after that is, well, where'd you park? You know, equally difficult. So, a few counterpoints in Burlington, Vermont, which you all know because it's not that far from here. Wonderful place. It's what do you do? But the answer is, well, I ski or I swim or I hike or I'm a, you know, sports. It means what's your sports fanaticism, things like that. And I'll just about every place we went to has that kind of has a question that's particular. My favorite one was, and this is true, New Orleans, where the question is not only who's your mama, because everybody knows who your daddy is by your last name, but who's your mama really kind of gets you in, and everybody knows all the family. But it's, how's your mama and them? Which then they tell you your mama, and you know you're in person when you know that kind of colloquialism. So,
And there's so many ways to approach this conversation, thematically, of course. But I do want to hear. You talk about some commonalities, and you talk in the book and in other talks about the book about towns that are somehow more promising, showing promise to their residents. And you talk about characteristics of those, and some of the commonalities. Everything's different from accents to, you know, to the monuments. But what are some of those commonalities? And give us a couple of really brilliant examples in your brain of those towns.
The part of this book that had the least, had the lowest input time to output time ratio, that is, I wrote it more quickly than anything else, is the part at the end, which is called 10.5 Signs of Civic Success. Because this was something, I was doing a big Atlantic article early in our travels, and the Atlantic suddenly had a page of advertising fall through. So there was a page that had to be filled in the last minute with extra copy. It says, oh, I'll make up a 10-point list, or a 10.5-point list of things we found around the country. And the 10.5, I'll get to the half in a moment, but we had been on the road for maybe a year or so then, and we said, there's something, for example, that makes Burlington, Vermont remind us of Greenville, South Carolina. You know, there are opposites politically. Greenville's very conservative, Burlington, the two parties on the mayor's ballot are, of course, the Democrats and the Socialists, and they couldn't be more different, but they seemed like the same place. We thought, what are sort of the common themes? And they ranged from, for example, we go into a town, and I'll give you a little context of the reporting process. Usually the towns we wrote about, we spent a total of about 2 weeks in. We'd show up on some Sunday evening in our little plane with rudimentary contacts, and we start the next day with the usual suspects. We go to the library, we go to the mayor's office, we go to public schools, we go to the newspaper, etc. And we'd ask people, the question we asked them is, who makes things go here? You know, who should we know? And if there was an answer to that question, the answer could be very different. It could be a philanthropist, it could be a sheriff, it could be a librarian. It was often a librarian, it could be a radio host, could be a musician. But if there was an answer, as opposed to some towns we went to and they said, gee, I'll have to think about that. You know, they didn't know who was holding the town together. People had a sense of what the civic story, what their town's story was. If there's towns in the Midwest where we rose, like Dayton, Ohio, where we spent a lot of time. You know, they see themselves as having been like the Silicon Valley of 100 years ago, and how to recapture that. And so having a civic story, whatever it was, and having paying both a research university, which is kind of a natural endowment, but also a community college. We took those as really important signs, and we had a list of these things. And I'll just, one other digression before, two digressions. First is, Amy, Deb said thanks, but I will say thanks to you for this occasion and your extreme generosity in introducing us and having this forum. That's one digression. The other digression is, for people, many people here I know are reporters and journalists, and I've spent most of my conscious life I went to college planning to be a doctor like my dad. I ended up spending all my time in the college newspaper, and what I love about the reporter's life is that you have license to ask about anything, and ask people, how does this work? So you can satisfy your curiosity and then tell people what you've seen. So we would do that for a week. We'd be sort of following breadcrumbs, see where we should go, and by the end of a week we'd say, oh, we have 100 more people to see. So we go back home for a week and then come and visit again. And then we started to see all these common themes. And one of them, the one half that I added at the end, was having a craft brew industry, because that was a sign of a certain entrepreneurial spirit. It was usually an important lever for civic downtown renewal. And so just, you can tell a story of Larry Gross in Charleston, West Virginia, or any story you want of people, since if you ask our two sons who runs the family, they instantly have the same answer, and you can guess what it is.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna tell that story, but I'm gonna tell another story. On the serious side, another thing we found, I think that is probably not surprising, but a core element of these small towns. And when we say small, like when Jim said, in China we went around to these small towns of 1 or 2 million people, that's true, that's small in China. In the US, we were kind of aiming for small towns, mainly being the definition of, most people have never been to that town, or even maybe haven't heard of that town. So we wanted to go to...
Could I intervene with
Yeah.
this one? So one other definition of small towns for us is a place that wouldn't be in the national news unless something went wrong. Everybody knows what New York is like, everybody knows what Seattle is like, but, and another good friend has come in, but a place that would only be in the news if there was a tornado or a natural disaster or the Iowa caucuses or whatever. So that was another definition.
But a commonality that we did find in these small towns, anywhere from 800 people to 12,000 people to 25,000 people. And interestingly, people in all those towns would say, this town is the perfect size. It's big enough so there's a lot going on. It's small enough so that I can have some agency in this town. Which is the point I'm getting to, which is about people's common sense of obligation and agency, that people know in small towns, nobody's gonna come in there and save them. It's up to them, whatever they are identifying as something that needs done, like, we don't have any streetlights in this town, or why don't we have a Saturday market, or the kids have no place to play, or there are no curbs and they need to be fixed. No matter what the issue is, and they can get to be thornier issues, people know that in this town, they have to get together and talk about it and cooperate with each other and get something done. So the cooperation is, you know it from the streets that you live on. You're gonna see your next door neighbor over the trash cans.
So let's break that down a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and this is really a really important element of your storytelling in the book. The civic, let's just call it engagement. Civic awareness of something, someone beyond ourselves, right? You talked about the library, which I find fascinating and wonderful, being a magnet, if not a big generator of activity in town. There are all kinds of ways of expressing civic engagement. What are some of the specific ways you've seen? Whether it's people getting together and doing a cleanup, or people opposing something that is clearly dangerous to their well-being, and they pull together. Okay.
Talk about libraries. Yeah.
I have another thought. Okay.
Go for it.
I'm just going to talk for a minute about Eastport, Maine, which is way down east. It's a population, 2,400 people, something like that. The town is so small that everybody has to pitch in on everything. If the pier, which is critical in that town, was, because it's kind of the first port of, it's a huge port.
It's a deep water port.
It's a deep water port, and it's the financial core of that town. And when the main pier was wiped out, they knew they had a problem. So whether it's something big like that, or whether it's something small, like during COVID, kids can't go to school. How are they gonna get their lunch and breakfast? Because that's where they eat school. We've gotta figure this out. So in that town, everybody has about 12 different roles. And when we were there was a play in the town hall auditorium. And the ticket taker we recognized because he was also the editor of the newspaper. The stage manager we recognized because she was the barista at the one coffee shop there, and also the nephrologist in the clinic in town, and she was opening a dog care, thing that was going on. So everybody wears many hats because that's the only way things can get done in that town. And the politics in that town, one question, why don't you talk about how we never talked about politics, or should I just say it?
You can say about
Okay,
national
so,
politics.
National politics. We had one rule in our travels, which was we would never go in and say, well, who are you gonna vote for, or what do you think of Hillary, or how about Barack, or whatever it was. We totally avoided those questions because we knew what the answer was gonna be. And our question instead was, so tell us about your town, what's going on in your town? Okay, so I digressed away, but I think you have a sense maybe of the civic participation that is interwoven, many-layered, strongly participatory, and essential for the workings of not only solving problems, but making the town run. Back to the libraries, we kind of stumbled on libraries as a wonderful first stop of where to go, because librarians know everything. They know everything about the town. People come to them with their personal issues of, I can't pay my rent, where should I bury my uncle, because I don't have the money, I don't have a doctor, or help me write a job resume, I don't know how to turn on this computer. And the issues have gone from how libraries started with books to everything civic. Of the most popular activity in public libraries is adult literacy programs. Critical. And so
you surely saw the aging population on your travels. America is gray.
Not there's anything wrong with that.
No, I rather like it myself,
Yeah.
No, but surely you saw that and
for example, during COVID, when the mature population who frequent the libraries couldn't show up at the libraries, the librarians and the staff knew that these people were hurting and wanting and lonely. They would call them on the phone, Burlington, Vermont. They would actually go through their lists and call these people to just kind of connect with them, say, what do you need? How can I help you? Can we bring you some food? How are you feeling? Are you scared? Whatever it was, through that. So the libraries are, fast forward to right now, is one of the main efforts of what libraries are doing, is deep civic engagement. There's a group in town called Urban Libraries Council, and they have started small grant programs to libraries all around the country for youth, ages, two groups, younger teenagers and then older young adults, to have what they call action tanks. What do you see as a problem, you 16-year-olds? Well, we see maybe that some of us are getting in trouble and we don't dare talk to the police. Okay, let's get a couple of you in here and let's talk about this, and let's walk through what it means to look at this kind of problem, get people behind it, bring in the community that needs to talk about it.
So the libraries are becoming conveners.
They are.
And
in
what is
civic
happening to reading,
engagement.
by the way? I'm just curious.
What's that?
Or is anybody reading in these libraries? Just curious.
Oh, yeah.
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 And
I see more of that than on the coast? I don't know if you were looking at the coast.
Everybody's reading in libraries anyway,
Everybody's reading.
besides all this stuff going on.
So are you handing this to me for a reason, or?
Jim, I wanna ask you about, the connection between art and nature. A point you made beautifully if you could just tell us all about it.
Thank you for asking that. I will again digress I'll answer that after a little oxbow circle here. In the signs, well, I'll go directly to it. The oxbow I'm avoiding is about how we avoided national politics when we were going around the country. And also, there was a sign just today, I think, in a Tennessee newspaper that was connecting what we'd seen over the years with what we all are concerned about here across the country, where a Tennessee guy was saying that when Tocqueville covered the country, he said there was all this sort of science of association that made the young American country distinctive. And he said that we had written about that. And there's a very popular young German soccer fan who's having a very high following podcast now about saying, we Europeans know the Americans are all terrible, but I'm here for the World Cup, and I'll tell you, they're actually really nice. And if you go to these cities, they're welcoming, etc. And I will save also for later saying the really powerful experience we got early in our travels of how most parts of the country are welcoming to outsiders. We saw that first in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where a young Somali refugee ended up as the head of the ROTC in the high school there, and they were defending her. But about arts, one of the powerful things, again, we saw maybe starting in Sioux Falls, was the way that civic leaders of all kinds used public arts and other kinds of arts to engage and connect people. In Sioux Falls, they have an annual contest, a public art contest, where the whole sort of downtown has, people, they have at every street corner, they have statues and they have paintings, and the whole population votes on which one is the favorite, and it's a bonding experience. I'm thinking, yes, well, you can tell the San Bernardino. So which part of San Bernardino?
The artists.
So, yes, so I grew up in the town of Redlands, California, which is the inland empire of California. It's very different from coastal California. And the big town next to it is San Bernardino, which is a troubled town, has been a troubled town in California. And a young group of mainly Latino, high school and college students decided they were going to connect the community through public art. And they had, young people out painting murals, and this both gave people some sense of pride in being from a community that was usually looked down on, and it created enough engagement that they were able to get people to come out to the polls and revise the city charter, which had been a real source of problem there. So I'm trying to think, there's one other bit of artistry that affected what we saw around the country. Something I love, one of the many things I love about flying small aircraft is the way the history of the US is laid out in front of you, and you can see the gaps in the Appalachians where people would go westward. You can see where the rainfall line changes. You go from one kind of foliage to another. And a sense of the beauty of where people live really matters. It matters more than you would think in thinking, these people out there, they're voting, they're angry, etc. People are proud of where they live.
And we
This
also
is a very important point.
Especially
Don't
in this
lose
setting.
it. Yeah, it's really, give us more on that. Give us a little more.
proud of where they are.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm going to elaborate on this on a little avenue that is equally important, and that is reckoning in the towns. We've been to 4 or 5 towns that have recently figured out how to address what they knew was a long ago problem about racial issues in their town. Columbus, Mississippi, Civil War hospital town. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Tulsa massacres in the 1920s. Duluth, Minnesota, site of the northernmost lynching, also in the early 1920s. And let's see, there's one other in this category. Ajo, Arizona, also from the 20s, was a copper mining town way south in Arizona that was built by Mexicans, Anglos, and Indians. And I say Indians deliberately because when we went around and met a lot of different tribal people, I said, well, this is awkward, but what am I supposed to call you? Native Americans, indigenous people, what do I say? And they said, we're Indians, just call us Indians. So, okay, so we got those three groups. So in each of those towns, there has been recently a sense that they needed to come to terms with what happened in the history of their towns. And they were going to do it through some means of public art. In Duluth, Minnesota, there was a lynching of some young black circus workers who had come to town falsely accused of raping a young white woman. Turned out not to be true. However, they yanked them out of the city jail and hung them from a light post before anything could be done. 100 years later, there is now, erected just maybe 5-8 years ago, kitty corner from that lamppost, a most beautiful little section that had been a kind of nothingness park that is now a cultivated park with a brass relief. Brass, would it be brass? What?
It's
bronze. It was bronze. Yeah.
It's a different zone.
Okay.
Never mind.
Yeah, relief of these three men and telling their stories and sayings from Martin Luther King and other people. It's in a part of town that you can't miss now. It's you have to go you have to walk past there to get anywhere else in town. And so now you see people going to that place because there is a place, looking at those reliefs, reading those inscriptions, and talking about what happened in their town to come to terms with it. Ajo, Arizona has a similar kind of little tiny, it's called Liberty Park, just a little nubbin of a park that tells the story of what you can easily imagine were the not equal treatments of the Mexicans and the Indians by the Anglos in that town. And it's there, it's pieces of art inset into the wall of this little tiny park. So, each of these places has come to say, it's up to us. What's the best way to address this past history? We'll make some art here where people, not only is it important, but people will stop and talk about it.
This is just riffing on what you were talking about, but I'm wondering, you were traveling the country when all kinds of monuments were being erected and torn down. What is the importance of monuments in these towns?
I'll give you an example from Pensacola, Florida. And many of you have probably been there. So Pensacola is a beautiful, Panhandle, Florida, naval base there, et cetera, et cetera. And its downtown had been dominated by structures named for the person who 100 years ago had been like the king person, the sort of the president of Pensacola. He was a rich landowner, he was just banker, et cetera. He also was the county tax supervision for a long time. Over the last 10 years or so, a lot of independent journalists and others determined that he also was the grand dragon of the clan during that time. And so Pensacola has been through a 10-year process of reconfiguring itself to recognize and reckon with its heritage. And we were there about 2 years ago for this sort of ceremony of public awareness, where they had members of this man's family, his descendants, who were there to talk about what they had learned about their heritage. And there were black and white preachers there, and all the different denominations, Catholic priests, rabbis, Muslim people were there. And so Pensacola's downtown now makes you, it makes you aware of the complicated history of the place. Those of us in greater DC recognize the importance of these monuments. And in my hometown of Redlands, a little town, there are all sorts of, there's a Lincoln Shrine there and other places which are there to make people aware of the past of the town and its future. So I think that I'll mention one other way. Oh, Deb, go ahead. I was going to mention Cal Volunteers, but you.
Oh, okay, so, in DC right now, there's a group called Citizen Historians who, 1,700 volunteers have gone to every Smithsonian and are documenting by photos everything for the record. It's there now. If it disappears, we'll know what happened. Similarly, they have a kind of sister organization that has been going around the national parks and
Give
monuments.
us actually a bit more on that.
Yeah.
It's important. This is actually a very organic way of assuring certain things and probably affecting change ultimately, but give us a little more on this.
So the idea of the citizen historians, there were a couple of professors at Georgetown who said, we have to know what's in these museums, because if they're threatened that things disappear from these museums, how will we know what was there? So they were flooded with volunteers who were just going out with their cameras and taking pictures of every single thing. And one of them has made this massive, spreadsheet or archive of everything going on. And the most important part of that right now that is going on is that there's another group that kind of worked with them or copycatted them a bit, going to the national parks. You've probably heard about that, or national monuments or national places of interest where people go to take pictures of all of the signage of the history of that particular place. And this is because there were threats to take down, and in Philadelphia it actually happened, take down references to the
negative part of America.
The negative part of America, right. The black people, okay, and the indigenous people. So you go to parks in south part of Arizona, which is in the middle of the Tohono O'odham Nation, and what happens if suddenly there's no reference to these people? It will be lost.
So it's scrubbing of who we are.
Right.
Who we really are.
Right, and so
Share.
just today,
Yeah.
or yesterday, there was a ruling by a judge saying, put them all back up. Any sign that's been taken on, any reference that's been taken off those signs has to go there because that's part of our history.
And just to pile on a second here, in our setting, both at this moment and in all of our lives here in Greater DC, we're aware of the tensions in our country right now. The metaphor I think of most often for what we're dealing with now is less Europe in the 1930s than it is China in the 1960s. The deliberate sort of extinguishing of memory during the Cultural Revolution. And we met so many people during our years in China who said, yes, during those years, our parents had to bury their books and bury their scrolls and bury their furniture and bury all the things which were sources of knowledge so they could be redeemed later on. And so we, at a time when we have national level efforts against the preservation of knowledge, we're seeing lots of local level efforts to push back on that and to preserve things, including citizen historians.
And it's one of those wonderful things that anybody can do it. And I mean, everybody's got a phone, everybody's got someplace that they care about and can go take these pictures.
And we're all going away this summer somewhere, somehow,
Right.
someplace.
And
Even
now,
if it's to a museum downtown, yeah, 100%, or a national park, or anywhere where we have a narrative that is being destroyed.
and one of my personal heroes was Jane Goodall, and she said, do what you can, where you are, as you are able. And that's the kind of strength of citizenship and democracy on this very local level.
Ooh, you lead me to a question I have for Jim. You're both really wonderful writers, and you bring it home, and you have an integrity I'm not sure is still present in the American journalism of 2026. I wonder how important journalists will be given what has happened to the quality of what we've done and what we're doing.
This is an ongoing question. When I was in college during the 1960s, time of turmoil, I studied American history and literature, which sort of positioned me for what's been the question that has connected all of my journalism in the decades since then, which is the question of, is America going to make it? Because the history of this country is always sort of the knife edge between the forces that are divisive and destructive and negative, and the forces which are working in the opposite way. And I think that journalism is an acute illustration of that now. We all know here in Washington, we know about the fate of the once proud newspaper here. We know about how the local journalism, its business model for the previous century has just been eliminated, and with sort of the devastation of local papers. But also, here are a couple of things which give me hope of the response in the other direction. For any of you who still get the print New York Times, as we do, the back page of, I think the front section today was a full page ad of the winners of the Independent News Network Awards. These were mainly organizations you hadn't heard of little startup journalism organizations around the country. And so at a time when the model that had kept the Redlands Daily Fax, my hometown, going for several generations, when that's been gone, you find new models of alliances with university newspapers. You find all kinds of other experimentation. So things are dark, but also there are 1,000 experiments going on. Also, I spent most of my time in college when not seeing Deb on the college newspaper. College newspapers are in a golden age right now. There are lots of places where they are structurally given responsibility for filling local news holes. For example, in Muncie, Indiana, with the Ball State University newspaper. And the kids these days are being as brave and industrious and integrity bound as kids ever were. So whenever I feel bad, I look at a college newspaper and you feel better. The Fresno State Collegian is doing all these investigations with the Fresno State administration, and that's happening all over the place. So I think there's still a supply of young people who want to do the two main things of journalism, to find out and to explain. And so I think there's a supply of people, and finding the ways to enable them to do that is the challenge.
There's also another movement on the local level that's really interesting called citizen journalists. Got the citizen artists and historians, also the citizen journalists. In Cleveland, Ohio, there's an online paper called The Land, Cleveland, right? The Land. And anybody who lives in that, they felt that their local news wasn't getting covered well enough. And the question was, well, who can cover this? And the answer was, well, we can all cover this. So they started a program to train any person in how do you be a journalist. And you say, bring us a story you're interested in and let's talk about how to do that. So they've trained waves and waves of people who write stories of local interest in Cleveland. They're published in this online paper, and they are paid for their work. This is one of many such local citizen training journalist organizations that's happening in Name Your Town.
That's cool. We're gonna open this up to a question or two. Madam, what is your name, please?
Hi, I'm Rachel Magoni. When you first talked about that question of what the status of journalism is now, my thoughts didn't go necessarily to the lack of journalism available. My thought went to the quality of writing is now getting degraded by AI, and how people think that is the way that you can get to a better story by letting that.
Everybody hear this? Everybody hear this over there?
I'll give you the microphone,
Oh.
or actually,
No,
you need to come up
no,
here. So
no, no,
yes,
no,
okay, yes, I
I'll try to be moderate.
I know the laws of physics.
So when you said that, my question kind of was, how would you address that situation that's happening where more and more people are, kids, adults, whomever.
The impact of AI on journalism,
Like, yeah. how does
essentially.
that-
Okay.
So I may be the only person you meet who doesn't have a theory of AI right now. I just don't know. I use it personally in my own work as sort of an extension of old Google search. There's a better version of search to try to find out, random facts. I don't rely on it, for writing or other things. But so I don't have a grand theory of AI. Almost every time in my life now of many decades, there's been concern that people are having shorter attention spans, and transistor radios would destroy kids, et cetera. TV would too. So it's hard for me to know whether we're really in a phase shift now, where where the flood of AI and the flood of social media and all the rest is really making a difference in how people think and communicate. I can tell you that in my hometown, which went for Barry Goldwater in 1964, it was considered just certain knowledge. My parents, who are, I revered, I remember my mom breaking down in tears after John F. Kennedy was elected, when he was elected, because it would be a sort of, meant the Vatican would be in control. And that was not how she spent the rest of her life, but I remember I asked Jill Lepore maybe 10 years ago or so when I was doing some piece, one of my many pieces on Is America Going to Hell? She said, the American people are terribly informed and always have been. My point about Goldwater and JFK in 1960 was that there always have been pockets of conspiracy thinking and just and pig ignorance and all the rest. Just have to, anything you read in American history shows these times. You just have to look back to the time when, within the span of decades, prohibition was enacted and then overturned, and there was, for 20 years, immigrants were discriminated against, were frozen out, et cetera. So I don't know whether this is just more of the same or whether it is the big change. I can't tell. But I think that all we can do, an extension of Jane Goodall, is what we can, as we are able, with the tools that are available to us. And we've tried to write about these tools. We have a website now called at Our Towns Foundation, ourtowns.org, and just continuing to have these stories of people who are doing things, finding ways to push the other direction.
You raised an important, very important issue of immigration, and I wanted to ask Deb, really, when you are landing places and you're hearing completely different accents, many of which I'm sure you can figure out and speak in a matter of hours. But tell us about immigration across the United States and what you're seeing in small towns.
So I think there's a before and after here, or there's a before and now here.
Yeah.
And when we were on the road a lot, maybe, well, when the before is. The number of immigrants in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Your first stop.
Our first stop. Erie, Pennsylvania. Burlington, Vermont. Fresno.
In Mississippi.
Mississippi. Yeah. I mean, anywhere where there were big groups of immigrants. They were Can you just say that line that you always say about near and far and immigrants that I always mess up?
So there's a near and far line I have about China, which will connect to these immigrants. That the one you're talking about, or is that different here?
The closer you are, the farther you are.
So one version of this homily is something that I said when we were living in China. I wrote a couple of books about China, and one of them was saying that China looks most imposing from a distance when you hear about these new high-speed rails and everything that's going on, and looks most fragile and contingent up close when you're seeing any family or any business or whatever. I think the opposite is true of the US. The US looks worst from a distance when you're reading the national news and the places you don't live yourself, and most promising and welcoming up close. And it is still the case even now that polls show that most Americans think the country is going to hell, but where they live is getting better. And that's still true even now. And that was true, just to the nth degree with reaction to immigrants. So that people say, oh yeah, oh, so I know what you're going to say. Yes, the farther you are from the border, the more concerned you are about immigration. The people who live with immigrants in their daily lives, that they, there's an immigrant problem, But our nation, our country, our city would be nothing without, you know, Mr. Gomez or Mr. The Bhutanese and Erie and all the rest.
Erie, Pennsylvania, 10% of the population are refugees. So, and they're new refugees, and there are waves of refugees, and they are completely vital to the economics of the town, and the town knows that and actually embraces that and makes it possible for new immigrants to come into their town and succeed. The library, for example, has ESL courses, citizenship courses, introductions to, you can get on the internet. If anybody where you're from was on the internet, we will help you do that. There are sections of books in the library. And in the schools, similarly, you know, there's like, back to Sioux Falls, 27 different languages in the schools. So they'll have an elementary school for kids who are new refugees to the town. These kids will pick up a book and hold it upside down because they have never seen a book before. They won't know how to hold a pencil, and you have to teach them how to hold a pencil. They've never been to a bathroom, so they don't know to go to the restroom rather than in the corner of their classroom. The problems are that dramatic, but the town knows these things, and the school system knows these things, and they have trained the whole system to accommodate and teach the newcomers and kind of blend them into the operations of the town. And so, you know, in Erie, pretty soon, 6 Bhutanese families will get together and buy a home, and they'll all live there. And then pretty soon they'll open a restaurant, and then pretty soon they'll buy some cars, and then they'll all have houses. So people in towns where there are
And then
lots
there'll
of
be another happy place. I couldn't resist, I'm sorry. Bhutan, the happy
yeah,
one.
right, the happy place. So, you know, obviously everything is not perfect, and you have to train the police, for example, when they pull over somebody for a traffic violation, know and understand that when they are trying to bribe you, this is not a crime in their minds, and kind of work around that. So it's the whole town working together, but it's been going on for a long time in these towns that
And
are.
that sounds pretty elevated. Some of that sounds really elevated, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say one other thing, what we all saw in the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul in the state of Minnesota this past winter, that's the face of the local level America we've seen over the last 10 years.
Tell us more.
So you saw people with pride in their communities and pride in the diversity of their communities. You saw local level civic fabric and bravery being expressed in bitter cold, with, you know, physical danger, with deaths. And I think if you wanted a stark illustration of the contrast between national level destructiveness and local level bravery and civic courage, I think of Minnesota in 2026 will be in the history books as that illustration.
We have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
I'm gonna cut you off so I can cut you
Yep.
back on. Okay, in the back, 1, 2, and then we'll finish up with you. And try to make questions, not statements, and quick, not slow, and answers,
Yes, we'll.
vite, okay?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Thanks for going on.
Jeff Smith.
I really liked your description of the civic activism that you found prevalent in lots of places that you visited. I'm curious to hear your description of how it compares to, or is different from, what you might have encountered when you were living in China. And for the following reason, I imagine from a distance, this is partly imaginary because I haven't had the
Fast, Jeff.
experience of living in China, but I'm imagining that that kind of civic activism made the government nervous. It made it likely to want to control it. It may have fell under government supervision and maybe redirection. And I'm wondering if you encountered episodes in your travels in America where things like that were beginning to happen, or whether you saw signs of things like that happening. Just draw, if you would,
Okay.
the comparison.
Cut to the answer.
So China has a wonderful culture and tremendous, we have 1 million friends in China. American people basically like Chinese people is my oversimplified view. China has never had a sort of Tocqueville style civic culture. And so I think that the government is glad it doesn't have that civic culture, and as you say, I agree with your description of how they try to stamp it down. That's my short answer.
Joan McEntee.
Could you just quickly tell us, how did you select the places that you chose to visit? And were there any places that you were really disappointed in? There wasn't that collective effort, and you just looked at each other and said, oh my God, let's get out of here, you know?
What's on the editing floor? Yeah.
Yeah, so we started out because we knew someone in Sioux Falls who we thought could help us we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know if we'd find nothing or anything. And so we went to the first 2 or 3 towns. We knew someone there who would kind of understand what we wanted to look for and help us. And then we were blogging as we went along for the Atlantic. Then we started to get emails from people, like if we'd write about the governor's school in Charleston, or in Greenville, South Carolina. We got a message from a teacher at the governor's school in Columbus, Mississippi, which was, you think that school's so great, you gotta come down here and see our town. So there was just we went geographically, we went with the weather, and then we thought, okay, we better it just got so interesting, we thought we'd never stop. And we had to go around to different parts of the country and try to
Did you return to places?
Oh, we did, yes.
And we have since then too.
Yeah, we have. So we just kind of followed it around.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry, I'm
The
just
second part of
wondering.
the question,
I'm sorry?
anything on the editing floor?
Oh, what's on the editing floor? Ooh.
Oh, Thanksgiving evening at a 7-Eleven truck stop in a part of Oklahoma I won't name. That was sort of a low point.
That was a very low point.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, we got
A few things we could not say.
Malcolm, and then we're coming here and
in
Yeah.
our-
So did you do cold intros, or were you introduced to the people? How did you approach? And how did you get around? Did you like have a bike in the back of you, like portable bike in the back, or did you?
So we would just, when we got to some place, we'd rent a car or whatever. A few places we had intros, but mainly it was just introducing ourselves the first day we were there, saying, we're writing about towns and what's happening here. Tell me who we should talk to. What's the story of this town? What are people concerned about? What are they proud of? And just sort of following the Venn diagram of it.
And the secret is people love to talk about their towns, and that was not a problem. Yeah.
Pride.
And you
Did you
introduced
have a question?
yourselves as writers.
You finished?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
we said
yeah.
we've been writing about this, and so we could show them, and yes, and one other thing, just very briefly, usually political reporters, when they show up in small towns, they are the experts asking, you're here from Washington. We were asking people on subjects where they were the experts, saying, tell us about how schools work here, tell us about young people moving in or moving out, et cetera.
Yeah, this gentleman's first. Did
Yeah.
you still have?
Your accolades about Minnesota were well appreciated. I mean, but to me, that is such a horror that our people, the people of America, have to be subjected to that, lose lives, and that we're up to 2 million immigrants right now that will be sent away and are in captivity, and someone engages. It's a tragedy.
I am not a supporter of current administration policies, and so the question is what we can do day by day, taking stands that we will be remembered for one way or the other. So I agree. It is another challenging time in American history for all the reasons you say.
Yes, sir.
Here's a softball. So if you were, and I wish you were, co-governors of a state, any state, what are the 1 or 2 things that you would do to bring your initiatives to the forefront?
Ooh, thank you, Rafe, our loyal agent and friend over the years who made the deal with HBO for us, among many other things. So, Deb, do you have
Is this a sequel you're planning?
we had the best possible movie experience, so we're sort of, quitting while we're ahead on that front. A specific thing that my home state of California is doing is the Cal Volunteers program, where they've tried to make it make it attractive and convenient for people to serve in different ways. There's kind of a combination of the GI Bill for people earning tuition to California universities. There's a counterpart to the old FDR CCC, where people can go out and do conservation projects. There are ways that older people can volunteer in food banks and whatever, but making it attractive and easy for people to do things, because there is this sense people like to do things, and most people like to do things. So I would have the Cal Volunteers model, which is being applied in North Carolina, I think, and in Maryland and others. Maryland.
Yeah.
What would you do, Ms. Deb?
Oh no.
Oh, yeah.
Fire you, I think.
Can we stop there? That was the best. Yeah.
One last question. I never end after the time all right, 2 more questions. If I have permission from everybody, yes? Okay, go ahead.
Actually, it's not a question, but I want to give Falls Church City some kudos. I lived there for about 5 years. It's an incredible experience, because I come from Brooklyn, New York, and I now live in Bethesda, and for 50 years. But it is so incredible to live in a small town where you can help make decisions.
Yeah.
I, as a single mom, went to the county council, the city council, and said, we have a problem here, there's no childcare. This is in the 70s.
Yeah.
And they said, well, you have a little background in this field, you go do something about it. That was an example. There was the League of Women Voters person next door who was doing what she needed to do. There were people across the street, the city manager lived across the street. I had a criminal issue at one point. Some issue with stalking, not of me, but of a friend of mine who was visiting me. And within minutes, the police.
These are places where you can do things because you know
Yeah.
people and you live close
Yeah.
by and you invest in each other.
And yet, we were living, surrounded by this incredible metropolitan.
absolutely.
So it's really a neat.
Natalie.
kind of thing.
So my question is going to take us a little bit out of the United States.
Natalie Jareska.
Natalie Jareska. When you're talking about civil society, what came to mind for me is the Ukrainian people. I'm obviously Ukrainian. But then when I was thinking further, really the difference between how a country seems to succeed or fail is how that local civic community affects national politics. So you have tribes, which are wonderful in Afghanistan, and yet, they're unable. In Ukraine, it's been civil society that's pushed the national scene. How do you see, if it's so strong in the United States in local communities, how have we not made that
Where's the
connection?
translation missing? Is everyone hearing this? Really interesting point. Everybody heard, okay, and if
Yes.
not, just shut up, okay.
So I'll make this as concise as I can. I think only a country with as much going in its favor as the U.S. naturally has, its scale, its location, its neighbors, its resources, etc., could survive a government as badly out of date as our federal government is. There have been about 100+ democracies that have come into being since our Constitution, in 1787. As far as I know, basically none of them have followed the U.S. model, because it has been, it's so hard to change, to update, et cetera, et cetera. So we are seeing an acute case in the U.S. of civic culture being sort of having this blockage because the national level is so gerrymandered in different ways, and so difficult to update. The U.S. has, over its history, had these, as I think many people have been saying, as Barack Obama was saying a day or two ago, we've had these brighter moments and these darker moments in our history, and so we've relied on luck in various ways. For example, it was luck that the would-be assassin of Franklin Roosevelt in 1933 missed. And it was bad luck for the mayor of Chicago, who was killed, but that Franklin Roosevelt was able to be sworn in. And it was bad luck of other assassinations we've had, Lincoln being the worst. But we are really pushing our luck now. So I think that successful societies find ways to channel these local level loyalties. And I think China, as we were saying earlier, that the national government fears that citizen power. The U.S. needs to find ways to structurally and culturally rebuild the connections here.
Thank you.
And admiration to the people of Ukraine.
Thank you.
That's for sure.
That's a good way to end it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Deb, can you say Fallowses? Because that's what's here, the
You- you-
Fallows.